Thank you for joining us today for this roundtable. My name's Andrew. I'm the Communications and Education Manager at Money 101. Delighted to be joined today by Yemi Penn, who's an engineer, entrepreneur, and transformation leader. Welcome, Yemi.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to talk about this.
And a very warm welcome also to Catherine Birchall, who is the founding director of Money 101. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Hi, Yemi.
Hi.
So the title of today's session is quite provocative, and deliberately so, but we haven't done it purely for the purposes of clickbait or sensationalism. There have actually been several studies and surveys done over the years that demonstrate that Australians would rather avoid discussing the topic of money altogether. In fact, there was a recent survey that found 42% of people found personal finance is the most difficult thing to talk about. So that's more than religion, sex, and politics. Yemi, if I could start with you, why do you think it is that we're more willing to talk about something like sex than finance?
I've been thinking about, if you were to ask me that question, what I'd say, and it's a tough balance. But in all honesty, I think because money has been tied to power, all you've got to do is go back in history on the role money was to play when it came to exchanging resources. And once again, all you've got to do is see media. I believe we tie our self-worth to money. So whether you either think you're doing well or not, depending on your money story, and for that reason, it's been a hush factor, especially because within organizations, I guess it's always been, I remember being told a number of times, don't talk about your salary or your negotiation. So it's been a culture that's just been there, but it's definitely tied to self-worth, I believe.
Look, I think we've been, as Yemi just said, we've been socialised into not talking about money. What we really need to do is to understand that, money is a major factor in our lives. And, it's always been called the dirty word or something that was very taboo in any conversation. And this has created other problems in other areas. So I think that what we've got to do is we've got to start to talk about money. We've got to understand money. We've got to understand financial situations. We've got to learn from other people. And it's not a matter of just going through to your advisor, your financial advisor, or an expert in this industry, in the industry. You've got to be able to talk with other people. You've got to be able to talk with your partner. And you've got to have very on-the-level discussions so that, everybody isn't disappointed in the end, and there's not a mix of communication around the word money.
Yemi, do you think there's an opportunity to be gained from the knowledge of other people that perhaps have greater life experience, different life experiences? I find that discussions can often prompt action. So if someone says they have a cheaper home loan rate, you might investigate further or change your bank or learn from others' mistakes.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't come up with a smart comment together, but how can we learn if no one speaks? Which is why I'm really, so like you said, if someone, if I wanted to buy a property or an investment, I'm not going to know who to ask unless they tell me where or how, who gave them advice. So for me, it's really important that we talk about it. Social media, for all its negative feedback, is one of the best ways we can communicate. I got a really good deal. This person helped me. Andrew, Catherine helped me when it came to finding the best loan rate, and just put it out there. I think people think it's always an immediate exchange. No, it's actually educating others from your wins. And if we became more comfortable talking about money, I think it would help a lot of people who are still working on their money story.
You mentioned social media. Perhaps there's a certain irony in the fact that we live in a social media age where people are maybe criticized for oversharing at times, too open with their personal lives, but yet there's still the stigma around personal finance.
Yeah.
Or potentially it could be part of the problem that you have those loudest voices on social media that are willing to maybe display their wealth and success, which perhaps, I guess, makes the rest of us maybe less willing to talk about the realities, the bad side. Yemi, Catherine, I'll open it up to you. What do you think?
Well, I think no one's going to really talk about their credit card debt, but it's much easier to talk about, look, I've just bought a new Porsche, or I've just bought something fantastic. So you're not going to talk about the downside, you're only going to talk about the upside. And it's very hard to be on the level and talk to people about all of these issues.
it's almost human nature, isn't it, to avoid talking about the bad stuff, isn't it?
Correct. But would we be okay if we spoke about the bad stuff on social media, like you say? I think you're right. There's a major discomfort with oversharing, but this is why great topics like this and roundtables are important. And if people don't want it displayed on social media, hopefully Money 101 can keep having these kind of conversations.
Yeah, look, sexually transmitted debt is one of the most insidious situations that you can really come across. I mean, it's hurt all round, and unfortunately, it can be either partner, but women often don't have their own accounts. I mean, sometimes men don't have their own accounts, but they all of a sudden become responsible for somebody else's debt, and they wouldn't necessarily have taken the risk if they'd really known what they were signing or what they were getting into. And it all sort of goes pear-shaped when they're misled into signing something or getting involved in something that they just don't have the capacity to repay. And someone said to them, look, don't worry, I'm earning, it'll all be fine, let's just get on with it. So they've taken more risk than they knew about. But the other situation is what happens when it goes pear-shaped with a relationship and you're sitting there paying off something that you didn't ever want. You didn't want the Porsche, or you didn't want the new watch or whatever. So you're sitting there paying off that credit card debt or that home loan. And women, if for example, have often been in a situation where they're left with the debt and the partner's gone off and he's taken off with the trophy wife, he's taken off with the nice car, they're looking after the debts and things, and they're also looking after children. And they're not in the same, they haven't earned the same income. And of course, women will never say no to their children. I can tell you that firsthand. That, when kids want something, they'll say, hey, mum, I need this. So they've already been in a different situation where you could afford all those things and it was all fine. And then mum's all of a sudden got to say, well, no, we can't afford it. We can't have it. We can't have those things. So women are often caught in a very vulnerable situation there, and they tend to keep giving, and then the kids leave home and they've actually got nothing for themselves and no nest egg. So and money isn't discussed in early stages. We've already of relationships, we know that, and yet it's the thing that actually brings a lot of relationships undone. And that's, again, very insidious, because someone's got a windfall or someone's won the lottery, and let me say that's very unlikely, or they've sold a business or whatever, and the other person thought, well, I was actually part of that, I was half of that. And so therefore you've got all of these problems that have been created in a relationship, and one person gets angry and the other person takes off, and this happens in all families, I would imagine. Yemi, you probably agree with that. It happens in rich families, it happens in poor families, and it happens in everything in between.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I know I've said money story a lot because I think that drives our behaviors. But, if I look at my culture in Nigeria, my granddad was well off, had lots of properties, passed on the wealth to my dad, and some would say he lost it. But he had a different mentality to money than my mum did. But here was the thing, from what I noticed, our behaviors always change. I find significant comfort when I've come into money, and then I get very nervous when there's less of it and there's too much at the end. So I think money is heavily linked to emotion, and depending on the type of household you grew in. I mean, I remember when I got married, no longer married now, but when I did, I remember trying to do a course on money because it was the number one problem. And if we know this and have known this for decades, why aren't we talking about it more? But agree with everything you say. I do have to say that there is major disparity, especially when there's conflict in families, nuclear families, when it comes to money. And so educating ourselves has to be a priority.
What we do at Money 101 is to make sure people have that information to hand, because if you haven't had that money education, it's difficult to know where to start. So it's something simple, but effective, I guess. Yemi, you recently published your book, Did You Get the Memo? That memo that you describe is this preconceived notion of what people think life should be like. So they maybe have this Hollywood image that we all grow up in a happy, stable, loving family, have an outstanding education, get that first job, get married, have kids, have the comfortable retirement, have it all, basically.
Yeah.
But for many people, that's obviously not the reality. How do you talk about, shedding society's conventions and really finding that fulfillment in your own choices? In terms of your own mindset around personal finance and career, sort of what were the major influences? Did you have access to financial education at all? Were there mentors to help guide you? Or did that sort of self-empowerment and I guess growth that you had, did that have to come from within, from your own experiences?
It was the latter. I'll tell you, I'm still learning every day. One of my most painful financial things was when I moved to Australia and I set up my own consultancy. I knew I was good at what I did. And I didn't have a property. Everyone was talking about property investment. And I remember going to one of these seminars and just putting down $50,000 with no knowledge on the fact that at some point that property in Melbourne was going to be complete. I'd need the mortgage. Did I have the credit? And I lost it because I didn't. So 2-3 years later, but it's what did I learn? So as much as my parents would have done their best, there was no teaching, nor was it in schools. So for me, it's been very experiential, and with my businesses, it's the same. But the difference is, having access to, organizations like Money 101 or friends who have gone through it, I can ask questions. But it needn't be like that, because it's madness. It's the biggest exchange of resources, regardless of Bitcoin or whatever else is coming out. And to learn it through major loss is really sad. But for me, one way I needed to do it, because I guess I'm kind of the new generational breed, for want of a word, who's trying to bring in intergenerational wealth in my family. But I think there's an easier way, and it's education. I bought a cafe in the middle of COVID, which I'm sure if I'd come to you all for advice, you'd have said, maybe you want to think about that. But I got my daughter working there, and just a little bit of pocket, and it's doing something for her. However, there's more to be done.
In terms of them, we know obviously that money habits can be set from an early age, and that can include bad habits as well. So for many of us, those values are instilled, whether it's our parents giving us pocket money to teach us the value of saving, or maybe getting a part-time job while at school to learn about that work ethic. I'm thinking, is the answer perhaps to have financial literacy as part of a formal school curriculum? Because I know I can only speak to my own experience when I was at school. We had subjects like economics and commerce. We'd learn these sort of monetary concepts, supply, demand, etc., how the stock market worked in general terms. But that education was rarely practical when it came to actual day-to-day personal finance. Catherine, I'll ask you this one. Do you think financial literacy should be taught as a subject in its own right in schools?
Look, I think that's the law of common sense, that it would be taught at school, and I think that there's been a very strong effort, or a big effort in Australia to do that. What you've actually got to keep in mind is that, yes, it's important to understand budgeting and money management and looking after your funds, but unfortunately when you're at school, you're not earning superannuation, you're not going to buy a house, you're probably not going to buy a mobile phone or anything, or you might buy a mobile phone, but you're only going to use any part-time money for disposable income, so you're not actually looking in the long term. So what actually happens is that it's very hard to get kids to think about money. The other barriers in this area is that clearly the curriculum is incredibly crowded, so fitting that in the curriculum, and then you've got the next situation where teachers, are they going to be the right person to teach? They may have no idea about superannuation, tax, money management, all of those things as well. So you've got to teach a teacher, and it comes back, well, have the parents already taught the kids? No, probably not. So it's we all talk about these things being taught from an early age, but it's more pertinent now to teach because times have changed. You don't go into a job and you don't stay in 2 or 3 or 4 jobs. You're going to change the whole time. It's a gig economy. You're probably not going to get superannuation. And so this education is more vital. So we've got to think about smart ways of doing it and making this education really practical for kids, because it's very difficult to make them think about something that's just not relevant to them. And that's probably the situation with most things that you learn at school. You don't understand the relevance until you leave. So how do we make it something that that they're really going to benefit from? The other backdrop, and the very sinister backdrop, and Yemi, on your point, you didn't know about it, who do you ask? There are certain professionals that probably don't want you to know that much about money. But in another sinister part of the world, we've got this dreadful consumerism. And, you know, in my early years, what they had was the Wheel of Fortune that would come on television, and you'd see a television, you'd see a refrigerator, you'd see all the things that you should have. And then consumerism has just got worse, and the marketing machinery that goes around, you know, gotta have it. You can have it, you deserve it, you absolutely deserve it. So we're all, you know, working against that backdrop as well. So look, I know that's I haven't necessarily given a straight answer there, but it is a convoluted thing. And how do we teach it so that it's relevant? How do we teach people so that they can see what can go wrong? It's like understanding if you don't have insurance and something goes wrong, that's when you really needed it, but you're never going to know when you do.
Do you think, I'll open this to you as well, Yemi, do you think the perhaps tone of some of the media coverage around things like house prices is perhaps exacerbating people's ideas of what money, what personal finance should be, what they should aspire to? Because as you mentioned, you shared your own experience about, you know, you've come into the country and seen, I guess, probably an overheated housing market, and gone and thought maybe you needed to get onto that next rung of the ladder without maybe perhaps fully considering the consequences. Do you think it's immediate? Because it's part of what we hear about all the time. House prices up and up. We have a government who is considering perhaps, you know, using things like superannuation, bringing that into enabling people to buy houses, and I guess fueling this marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I was writing frantically as Catherine was speaking. I had consumerism written down, and I've got capitalism written down, and I've got relevance written down, and we all have our own, I guess, our own views. And we can't always blame media, because I love the outlet that gives me. But there's a big element of consumerism. You can have this house. I mean, now you've got influencers all over saying, you know, I post about what lipstick or what bag or what shoes I wear, and you can make X amount of money. Once again, not knocking anybody saying what's right or what's wrong. I think what we don't have is the education to, well, what are we trying to achieve? How is this relevant to me? Is this what I'm actually looking for? And, you know, this might sound wishy-washy, but I think part of the education factor needs to be purpose. What do we want to do? You know, I've gone from wanting the nice car and the big house to now just wanting less. I all of a sudden just want to live in a hut in the middle of the forest, but I want to be able to go and get a coffee or buy a book. So my purpose and relevance is changing. And how great would it be if we could use media to educate on the different reasons for why we would want money and the best outputs. But the other thing I have to mention is I'm not comfortable with too many big conglomerates being the only ones who can educate us on money. I'm also looking for the small businesses who focus on the hearts of the challenges, because we are the majority. There is a 1% where they might carry a lot of wealth, but there's also the 99 or 95%, depending on how you see it, who also want to know things that are relevant to them and the life they're living. Long-winded, but media's got a role to play in the education and not just glamorizing what might not be realistic for most.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen that sort of democratization of knowledge, I guess, is through the internet. I think that's been a positive, obviously. And it's certainly, you know, something that Money 101 does to try and empower people, I suppose, through having that education, because without education, it's difficult to have positive outcomes if you don't know where your start point is, I suppose. So clearly, as we've discussed, it's not just for kids who are starting out where financial literacy might be lacking. It's in adults as well. Many of us maybe only start thinking about money when we actually leave home or start a relationship or purchase a house. Catherine, you've been providing digital financial education through Money 101 for over 15 years. What's the answer, do you think, to increasing financial literacy in adults? Is this a space where businesses can really step into the breach and make a positive change and actually support financial well-being for their staff?
Look, absolutely. I think business has definitely got a role to play here. What they've got to be really careful of is obviously what sort of financial education is going to be provided. And I think the point is that we've done a lot of research and we really do understand that financial education in the workplace is a lot further ahead in the UK than the US. We're a long way behind, and there's lots of reasons for that, because it's linked to pension and it's linked to other things. So that education has been a lot broader, and there's been a lot more players in the field. But I think it's up to the employer to have a look at what's going to make their staff happier, healthier. And we've now, the silver lining for COVID is, yes, we're questioning values, like you said, Yemi. We're starting to look at, maybe we don't need to have that. Maybe it's nice to be at home with family, maybe, and questioning all those sorts of things. But we've also got to understand that, and this is where, we've put these wellness programs into workplaces, but we've been very reticent to get the financial well-being in, which is often the problem. So if you actually look at the individuals, they're worried about their financial situation. They might be worried about their health. They're worried about their children. That's their personal situation. The employer is looking at a bigger circle of what's going wrong and how they can assist. But employer, if you can provide them with an education which is something for everybody, it covers all ages and stages, for that person, if it's fun and engaging, you've got to talk to people about what's relevant in their life. If you put up a module and says, let's just learn about superannuation, people aren't necessarily going to go in and look at that. But if it's something relevant, like something like one of us just lost our job, or loss of a partner, or one of those life happens moments when they really need it, if it can be prescriptive and it can be not reactive, but it's something where people can actually get some general competence, and have a look. And a lot of our modules have got box pops in them where they can actually hear that somebody else has got a credit card debt, and how did they fix it up? How could we do it? So they can go into this private sort of environment and start to have a think about it. So it's an interactive module. There's articles, you can flip through like you would like just a general wellbeing program, but the actual platform lets people go in and focus on what's relevant to them. If they're going through retirement, if they're putting their parents into aged care facilities, if they're going into aged care facilities themselves, if they're buying a phone, if they're buying a house, what to look for. If you're going to a financial advisor, what questions do you ask that financial advisor? If he says to you, how much money have you got to invest? Then you get up and you walk out. Because what he's got to understand is what your goals are, what your needs are. We don't all have the same goals and needs. So we have to provide something for everybody. And so what we're looking to do is to, if you're going to be an employer of choice today and you're going to offer something really important to your staff, then finance is one of the things that's required. Probably the lack of opportunity to date is that they haven't been able to find the right sort of education. You don't want to bring someone in who's going to sell a product. You don't want someone who's going to come in and give a complex seminar where they all walk out and think, I'm more confused than I was when I walked in. I mean, we've all sat through those, haven't we? I sat through cryptocurrency talks and presentations, and I'm still none the wiser, and I've got a finance background. So, if that's the situation, what's the average person going to know about this? And so what we've got to be is a lot more transparent. But I do think that the workplace can provide an education, and it doesn't have to be linked to something. It shouldn't be linked to more consumerism, like, well, you've just won some points and now you can get a flight, or now you can buy a lipstick, or, what you want is for them to have an education that will support them and we all have those terrible moments where you go, how am I going to fix this? And Yemi, I love the fact that you could disclose that you had this problem, because there are so many Australians that have bought in an overheated housing market now that are going to really want some support and think, how am I going to fix this? Where is this going?
Yeah, and I think having and you're right, and maybe there are different stages. There's the educating before you make a decision, and then there's the fixing. So I really love that you highlighted. Just one thing I wanted to very quickly pick up. I think part of the educating, if I was to take myself as a consumer here, is being more creative in how it's done. I remember watching some sort of cartoon feature, 3 minutes long, Ray Dalio, I don't know his title, but it's quite influential in the US, and just explained how money works and goes through the banks. And it was so simple that I just got it. And I think that's where we're really going to become ingenious, is how can we be creative? Apart from the fact that everyone's trying to get our attention, I think we tend to make a decision after 2 to 3 seconds as to whether we're going to watch a video or read an article. For something as important as money, I think let's get creative in how we educate young, old, and everything in between.
Yeah, we've been really fortunate that over 15 years we've looked at continuous improvement. We've tried to make it fun, like, one of us just bought a fur baby. So in the end, what's that going to cost you? You don't want to mortgage your house to go on holidays, you have your dog looked after in some, really expensive pet hotels. So the other point of it is that, we try and make it fun. As I said, if the topic is not relevant and if it doesn't look interesting, and you want people to go in and get the information they want there, it's got to be easy to access, and then once they've found it, they can go somewhere else and look for other things. But if they've got that foundation and they get that, and they can go where they want to, and they can do some interactive things. We've even got games on there, so people can do snakes and ladders and go up and down with investments and things like that. Because if you don't make it fun, people just won't engage.